through clinical work. And then I moved into naturopathy. As I said, Anthony, you know, I met his brother. We worked in A&E together. So we were working in frontline. Most of my years have been working frontline medicine. So that, I think, is enough to speak for itself. Now, obviously, as I said before, I may not have that aesthetic appeal. Anthony's brother, certainly, he's a very slim-looking guy. And a lot of people associate being slim with being healthy. And I can tell you right now that that doesn't always usually marry up. I can tell you some slim people who've got very high cholesterol levels, who've become very diseased and chronic, but that's another story for another day. The other feedback I got was that some people said that I'm not dressed appropriately. I should be wearing something that makes me look slightly more credible, like wearing a white coat and all this. Like I said, I'm not here to promote myself. I'm not here to try and look credible. All I'm doing is passing a message on. I would say to you, it's entirely up to you whether you think that whatever I have to say is of any benefit to you. All I can tell you is that I've been fortunate enough to work with some very sophisticated machines in the on my naturopathic journey. And through using those machines, I managed to find out the information I have. And that's what I want to share with everyone. And that's basically the message I'm trying to get across. My credentials are very easily able to find online if you're interested in all that. But again, like I said, I worked for so many years as a doctor. I moved into naturopathy. I find that as a naturopath, we have a lot more tools in the box. And also we have a much better understanding of both sides of the coin, as Anthony put it, where we can use the knowledge that we learned from medicine and try and use natural methods to try and solve some of those problems. And in my particular case, I've been able to use some very sophisticated machines which aren't used in mainstream medicine, which has given me a lot more insight into what's going on around the world. And that's the message I want to get across. That's the message I want to spread to the world. It's entirely up to you whether you think what I'm saying is fake news or hoax or whatever. Some of the things that I might say might be bordering on what might be considered conspiracy, but I'm trying to avoid those things. I think what we need to do is to just stick to the bare facts. And the information I want to get across to you really is just to kind of embody what Kangen water is, and it will follow on a lot of some, apologize if there's some repetition in what I'm saying. So we'll go straight on now into talking about Kangen water, which is what this is all about. And the first thing I'll say is that I've got my props here. So I've got my Kangen water 9.5, which I drink. I've also got the two black bottles, which we keep the pH 11.5 and 2.5 in. During the COVID lockdown, I would actually encourage you to have these at the front of your house where people come in, and obviously you can spray them, you know, when they come in, or spray the, you know, their shoes or what have you. A lot of people walk in with shoes. It's always a good idea to spray the shoes. Shoes actually carry a lot of disease. People walk around. People usually, I don't know if you ever see on the TV, some of them, they put their shoes on their beds and all this sort of thing. That thing is I don't know if you know, but a lot of the Asian cultures and some of the Eastern European cultures insist on people putting their shoes outside, and when they walk in, they walk either barefoot or they walk with their in their socks. So again, it's a cultural issue, but again, it's another thing that one should really try to observe if you're concerned about things like the spread of diseases and all these kind of things. So back to Kangen. Obviously, we know that the three properties of Kangen water are alkalization, antioxidation, and microcluster. Those are the three main properties, and those are the things that make Kangen unique in terms of being able to be one of the most efficient transportation mechanisms known to mankind to deliver fluids to every single cell in the body, of which we have approximately 37 to 72 trillion of. And I am talking about the water which is in the alkaline group as opposed to the acidic group. We'll come on to acidic in a minute. And the alkaline water is going to be of the pHs 9.5, 9, and 8.5. And of course, you've got 11.5, which is the stronger alkaline water, which is used for washing fruits and vegetables. So starting with the ones that you drink, the idea is obviously to get this water into you to allow you to try and optimize the pH of the cells in the body. the purpose of which, if kept in an alkaline state, will help to deter any things like, for example, cancerous change. If you look at the works of Otto Heinrich Warburg, he had stipulated that if pH is 7.41 or above, the cancer cells are less likely to grow. So he was able to find and postulate some points which would allow cancer to be less likely, and alkaline is one of them, and also having an oxygen-rich area to allow the cells to replicate and all the works. So that's the work of Otto Heinrich Warburg, which supports that. You've seen a lot of the demos that are done. This is something that's mentioned. Just to add a bit more to that is that with the cell itself, if you know the concept of the cell, which has within it the mitochondria, and you have all of the various apparatus which help that cell to function. The main purpose of a cell is really to produce product. And when I say product, it's the way to imagine it is like an Amazon warehouse, which is shipping out product to various parts of the country, in our case, different parts of the body. And these will be at the behest of what our body requires. So for instance, if you need hormones, or if you need nutrients in a certain place, or if you suffer a cut and you need nutrients to be in that particular area to help to reconstruct whatever's been damaged, then the cell needs to be able to be optimized in order for that to work. And the reason why Kangen Water assists in that process is, if you imagine a factory and you have a lot of workers inside, you want to keep your workers happy. Because if you keep the workers happy, then productivity goes up and you're producing a lot more product, and the products are getting shipped off to the necessary areas. So you want to make sure that your workers are in a warm environment. If you've put the temperature down, they're less likely to work. You want to make sure that they're fed. You want to make sure that they have music in the background, or all of these environmental things that would make their job or their environment easier for them to work is exactly analogous to the state of the cell. You want to make sure that your pH is optimum. You want to make sure that there's enough nutrients available. You want to make sure there's enough oxygen going to that area. So all of these things are what's going to help to optimize the cell so that they can work effectively and transfer all the various products to different parts of the body. So that's what the alkaline water is doing in their various different pHs. Some of the drawbacks in terms of having higher pH, if any of you are people who have a very alkaline diet, I would encourage you not to take the strong pH 9.5, go for something like the 8.5. And the reason for that is that what you have to realize is the concept of body compartments. It's a very important piece of information that I always, again, in my lectures, I try to get across to you, because it's important for you to understand how the body is split up in terms of fluid. So one of the questions I always ask in my lectures is, how much fluid does a 70-kilogram male have? And when we talk about fluid, I'm talking about blood, I'm talking anything that has a liquid entity, and most people will usually end up coming up with the right result, which is about 45 liters. So if you imagine in here, this is a 1 liter bottle of liquid. If you take 45 of these and line them all up, that's the equivalent of how much fluid there is in a 75-kilogram male. Now, the next question we have to ask ourselves is, how is that fluid distributed throughout the body? And the way to split that up is, first of all, to consider the blood. Why do we consider blood? Because blood is one of the crucial elements which are focused on, especially when you go to see your doctor. When you go to the doctor, the most common test he'll send you for is a blood test. So how many liters of blood in a 70-kilogram male? 5 liters. So 5 out of those 45 is 1/9. So now when you put that in perspective, you realize that when you do a blood test, you're only really getting 1/9 of the picture. And that's very important, because what that means is that there may be some things that aren't picked up in the blood. There may be some things that are picked up in the cell that don't appear in the blood, and that can be very misleading and very difficult. So you have to understand the limitations. And this is one of the limitations of the modern medicine that we have today. When you do a blood test, it only gives you 1/9 of the picture. So where do you get the other 8/9? Well, the other 8/9 is in the distribution of where the other fluid is. And as I said before, we have about 37 to 72 trillion cells in our body, and the rest of the fluid is distributed intracellularly. So if you were to take all the cells and you were to take all the fluid and extract all the fluid from each and every one of those cells, you'd arrive at the value of 25. And if you then consider the remainder, which is 15, which makes up your 45 liters, because you've got 5 in the blood, 25 intracellularly, 15 extracellularly. So what that means is that if you consider this bottle as a cell, which has 25 liters inside, the cell is bathed in fluid as well. And the fluid in which that cell is bathed in is comprised of 15 liters of fluid. So you have 15 extracellularly, 25 intracellularly. So back to the question of the alkaline water, why should people who are on alkaline diets be careful about using pHs which are high? It's because of that differential between fluid intracellularly and extracellularly. So when you have a lot of fluid in the extracellular space and very little fluid intracellularly, then there's going to be a discrepancy. And that discrepancy will determine whether that cell is functioning in its normal, optimized way. As I said, the purpose of a cell is to produce product. So if you impinge upon the fluid intracellularly and extracellularly by adjusting that ratio, which can happen if you drink too much alkaline water or you're an alkaline diet, then that is going to affect that distribution. So what then happens is that the cell membrane of the cell has what's known as a resting membrane potential. And that resting membrane potential is usually between -70 and -90 millivolts. And that resting membrane potential determines, or is determined by, the electrolytes in the fluid inside and the electrolytes in the fluid outside. So by having an alkaline diet, you will affect that relationship intracellularly and extracellularly, which will then impinge upon the cell resting membrane potential of the membrane, which will then impinge upon the manner in which the cell communicates with all the other cells in the body. So herein lies two major functions. One is to produce product, and the second is to communicate with the other cells in the body. And that's important because the organism works as a functional organism, which allows information to be transferred from the brain down to the rest of the body and all around, in order to prioritize the body's needs. Now, there is another concept which I would like to introduce here, which is what's known as the intrinsic self-regulating mechanism. Now, what do I mean by that? Intrinsic, ISRM, intrinsic self-regulating mechanism. Now, what that is your body's ability, or what determines how that works, is your body's ability to prioritize those things which are important. And what do I mean by that? For instance, you're going through your average normal day, you wake up in the morning, you go and have your breakfast, you might put the oven on, you might burn yourself. You then go out and do your normal duties, you might pick up an infection, so that's another milestone. So along the way, you pick up problems, you burn yourself. So if you burn yourself, your body needs to then prioritize the production of products to go and heal that wound. Yeah. If you go out now and you pick up an infection, your body now has to produce product in the form of cells to then defend your body against that infection. So constantly throughout the day, determining what you do, your body has to prioritize those things. And it is the intrinsic self-regulating mechanism that allows your body to prioritize those things. And that is one of the things that is controlled by or determined by the cell's ability to communicate with the other cells. So do you see now how Kangen water can have such a very huge effect on the manner in which the cell or the whole body works in union? It can affect the way in which that intracellular extracellular fluid relationship works, and therefore affect the cell membrane, and therefore affect the way the cell communicates with the other cells in the body. Incidentally, the cells communicate with each other on what's known as the gigahertz frequency, and it's usually at about 90 gigahertz. Right? I just want you to remember that figure, because I will raise that issue a little bit later on with something a bit controversial, but I think it's important for you to understand it. So now what you're learning, so basically, just to summarize a little bit what I've said, we've talked about body compartments. We talked about the fluid, how it's separated in the body. We've talked about how the cell has to produce product. We've talked about how the cells need to communicate with one another. And I introduced this concept of the intrinsic self-regulating mechanism, which is designed to prioritize the important things that your body has to deal with on a daily basis. Another way of trying to understand that concept of the ISRM is to consider, for instance, a person who works in a hotel. So the hotel guy comes in, he comes in the morning and he's given a clipboard. And on this clipboard, he has a list of the priorities that he needs to do. So he has to go, for example, up to the 5th floor, and he has to fix the fridge in one of the rooms. He has to go on the 4th floor and fix the chandelier in the gangway. He has to go and fix the lift on the 3rd floor. He has to go and fix, because the lift is blocked on the 3rd floor. So he's got to deal with all of these issues. So that is your housekeeping. That's essentially what your body has to do. That's what your ISRM does. It has to prioritize all these jobs. Now, if the jobs become so overwhelming at the same time, that's when your body then goes into a stress. And the way to try to understand that is to come back to our bottle again, right? So you have now what's known as the capacity. This is your intrinsic self-regulating mechanism's capacity to deal with issues. So fixing the light bulb on the 3rd floor, fixing the lift. As you go up and up and up and up, this bottle, this capacity gets filled up, and it gets to a critical point. And then you get a straw that broke the camel's back scenario, where you might have, for example, a viral infection that pushes your body over the edge, and then you're up here somewhere. You're out of the capacity. And when you get to this point, this is where your body goes into some sort of a response. And one of the things you might find, for example, is you might have a temperature. Now, I just want you to get this concept of a temperature into your heads, because this now kind of lends itself to what's going on in the world today in terms of picking up infections. So when you have a temperature, what you can say is that your body has now recognized that there is a source of infection. That's the first point. And the second point is that your body, the intrinsic self-regulating mechanism, part or aspect of the body, is now being overwhelmed. It's being overstretched. It means it's out of the capacity. It's very important you understand this concept as well, because that is what's going to help you understand how I've been applying some of the sophisticated machines to ascertain what I have when this whole COVID-19 thing's been going on. So I just wanted to introduce that concept as well. So the intrinsic self-regulating mechanism, I said you've got the capacity. If you go out of capacity, if you're here, that's when you get a temperature. If I can somehow find a way to address the problem that pushed it over the edge, like I said to you, for example, you get exposed to a virus, or you go and see somebody on the bus and you pick up viruses from Maggie Smith, and then you pick up some viruses from Rob Horn, and you pick up some viruses from Sue J, and all of these various different people, then all of this is going to mount and cause you to go more and more out of the capacity. So if I was to put you on a machine to kill all of those viruses, that means that your ISRM will not be overstretched, and your body's capacity, you will be able to fall back into this capacity range, and then your temperature will go away. And that's basically how I was able to find out, or able to get some success with using some of the machines. I have a machine which can actually be used to target the COVID-19 and various other viruses using what's known as plasma light energy. And that plasma light energy targets the virus within the body, and it can actually kill it wherever it is. And this is something, again, which is not accepted in mainstream medicine. It's based on the works of somebody called Rife, who was an American, who was able to define or able to ascertain that every organism has a frequency which you can target, which will actually eliminate that particular organism. And bacteria are single-celled organisms, so the frequencies are a little bit less complex as compared maybe to a human being or a multicellular organism, which would require probably a huge range of frequencies in order to eliminate that organism. So bacteria and viruses can be targeted using plasma light energy. That's the technology I was using to try and help to get some of these people to improve their symptoms. So by actually having somebody who was here, by blasting them with this light energy, their temperature went back down, which would indicate that their body is now within the capacity, and therefore they have more capacity to deal with all of the other problems which that individual will have probably have been exposed to, because the ISRM then has to now prioritize all of the other problems that that person is going through. So I wanted to end that there, just to give you a little bit of cellular physiology information to try and understand those concepts. It's a bit difficult to pack all of this into an hour, but I just want to get those points across to you so you can understand where someone like myself is coming from. One of the things you're gonna understand with me is that the way I understand medicine now is very different from the way medicine is being practiced, or the way in which medicine is being interpreted. A lot of the problems that we go through is the way we interpret things. And if we just try and change the way we interpret how medicine is approached, or the way in which the physiology is interpreted, then it can actually help us to solve a lot of problems. And that's one of the things that I found whilst on my journey through naturopathy. And that's what I also wanted to share with you. So coming back to Kangen again, that's the alkaline water. We've talked about how it optimizes the cell. We know how important it is in the relationship in terms of the cell reorganization and the way the cells communicate with each other. That's the topic, that's the actual drinking water. Now we come on to my other props, which is the pH 11.5 and 2.5. These are topical, these are acidic waters. Now, sorry, start again. So you got the very strong alkaline water, which is used to clean and wash fruits and vegetables. Now, the other thing to say about pH 11.5, it's because it's on the extreme spectrum of the pH meter. What that means is that there are a lot of viruses and bacteria and microorganisms that can't handle the pHs of that magnitude. So when you then spray this onto those bacterial viruses, they will somehow detect that environment and they will self-destruct or what have you. and that is usually if the viruses are on the surface. As you may have heard, COVID-19 can be around for many days on some surfaces. So by spraying this, you actually reduce the risk of that being spread. So this is why I would encourage you to have both 11.5 and 2.5 available, because these are the extremes of the pH, and being on the extremes of the pH spectrum, these bacteria and viruses are not able to live in those environments, and that's essentially why we're using these topical extreme pH fluids. The other pH to mention is pH 5.5. That I've mentioned in a few of my previous lectures is very good at dealing with a lot of bacteria, because remember, you've got to think about there are different colonies of bacteria, some of which will be able to sustain very low pHs, some which will be able to sustain high pHs, obviously still within 2.5 and 11.5, but the majority of bacteria will be not able to sustain the pH of 5.5. So 5.5 should not be underestimated. It contains HCl as well as HOCl, which is hypochlorate, and these particular acids, weak as they are weak enough to destroy and kill the bacteria through affecting the membrane and allowing those bacteria to get destroyed. So that's the thing to say about 2.5 and 5.5. So so we've covered topical fluids, we've covered the alkaline water that you drink. I think we've labored on a lot about antioxidation, alkalization. One of the things I also wanted to mention while we're on the topic of Kangen is that I've been keeping in touch with a lot of the superhuman forums about a lot of questions that have been raised there. Recently, one of the questions which were re-raised was the concept of the studies. Yeah, what are the studies to show that Kangen water, as opposed to any other water which is similar to Kangen, what are the studies which will show that this is capable of doing X, Y, and Z? And one of the things I've mentioned about studies is that studies are something which is actually used a lot in mainstream medicine to support the narrative of what's known as evidence-based practice. And evidence-based practice uses these models to justify why that particular way or methodology is more advantageous over another one. So if we take, for example, a product, say a drug, and we say, right, we're going to give this group drug A, we're going to give these people drug B, and whichever drug has the better effects, we'll say, yeah, that's the one we endorse. That's a very simple model. But one of the important things I want to mention about studies is that you've got to consider the bias. In any study that you do, there's always going to be some form of bias. The first bias is who is actually funding the product, or who is actually funding the study. Because whoever it is that's funding the study are investing a certain amount of money into a study which they hope will push the agenda that they're pushing. So you've got to consider that aspect. And that goes with everything. You will not find any studies, certainly that I haven't been aware of as yet, where Kangen is funding a study that will try to push their water. They don't do it, because the thing is that, again, there's no credence to that, because obviously if they're funding it, then of course the results are going to be good. You can't guarantee. They're not going to push a study which is going to show that their water is bad. So the concept of study is something which you've got to be very careful about. But there are some parallel studies which have shown that water very similar to Kangen, and this is where, if you're interested in studies, and you've got to look up something called electrolyzed water, because that's what it is, or electrolyzed ionized water. If you look up those words, those key buzzwords, then you will find some studies which will tell you about the electrolyzed alkaline water, the electrolyzed acidic water, and they will give you some benefits, and that might give you some indication as to why Kangen is beneficial in some of those things. And they use very impressive physiology and everything to explain those things. So that's one of the issues. Now, in terms of the biases, things to consider is, one, who's funding the study. The second thing you got to consider is the law. What is the legal implications? Well, one of the things I always say in my lectures as well is this concept of the only cure for a disease is a drug. I'll say that again. The only cure for a disease is a drug. That is something which has been pushed into the medical profession. That is something which has been, it's almost like a sort of mantra. And the implications of that are quite multiple. The first thing is to consider the word disease. Now, who defines the disease? It's usually the doctors that define the disease. You have this thing called the ICD-10, which is a book which tells you all the diseases in terms of their codes. And that book tells you or defines the disease. There are many diseases which have started to creep into the medical profession, which never used to be classified as diseases. But one of those examples is something called ADHD. I don't know if any of you have heard of that, attention deficit hyperactive disorder. Now, certainly in some parts of the world, you'll always find a disruptive child in the classroom, and some people have now regarded that as some form of a disease. Now, again, it's entirely up to you how you interpret that, but you know, now that it's a disease, because it's made its way into the ICD-10, what that now means, it has implications, because now the only cure for that is a drug. And that's how they then manufacture the drug, which is manufactured by the pharmaceutical industry. And now you have the problem, you have the action, and then you have the solution. The problem is the disease, the action is everybody's frantic about it, and the solution is your drug. So, and then the other, I know we're kind of bordering on conspiracy, because I know that there are some people who use that same problem, action, solution, but you know, it is what it is, right? And the only cure, by saying only cure, that means you've now put a barrier around it. That means that if anybody else comes along and says, well, Kangen water can treat ADHD, well, then now if I sell this water, they can lock me up because I'm selling an unlicensed drug. See? So these are the kind of implications, and that affects the studies. You see? So that's a classic example. The third thing is that to consider when you talk about studies is that everybody's biochemically different. Just because 50 people in the room respond to a drug and the other 50 people don't respond to that drug, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the drug that's wholly responsible for those results. Because there are some people who might metabolize the drug more effectively and don't get the symptoms or don't get the beneficial effects of the actual drug, because their body they oxidize or they somehow chemically alter the drug when it gets in their body. So that's another bias which needs to be somehow rectified. The last thing, which I'll mention about these studies, is that whatever it is that you're actually going to use has to be measurable. And what I mean by that is that if you look at the drugs, for instance, when they make a drug, they have a chemical symbol or they have a chemical formula for that drug. Yeah? Remember the word formula. And because it's a formula, that means that if you reproduce this study anywhere, you should get the same results. That's the theory behind it. If you produce a formula, provided you use that exact formula in a different place and you conduct a set of studies, then those studies should, in actual point of fact, create the same outcomes and therefore support the whole notion of following or adopting that so-called drug. Well, the problem with Kangen water is it's not measurable. Why is it not measurable? Because it depends where the water source is. If you take the water source from India and compare it with the water source from Yugoslavia and put it through the Kangen machine, that Kangen machine doesn't suddenly convert all of that water to one type. because that water that comes out, it has the three properties, but they may be slightly different in mineral content. They may be slightly different in terms of the amount of antioxidants that's produced at the other end. So this is one of the problems why you're going to find that when you come to use something like a natural thing, like a lemon or a fruit or something that's God-made as opposed to man-made, you're going to run into some serious difficulties when it comes to trying to reproduce those studies at one place and another. And that's one of the other problems. So those are the four main things that affects studies. And that is basically where I wanted to wrap that up. The last thing I want to mention for the last 5 minutes before we go into the, have we got enough time, Anthony, to go into questions at the end? If I do another 5 minutes on this?
Yes, all good. Yes.
Okay. So the last thing I want to mention is to give you a bit more about COVID-19, because we've talked a lot about the Kangen water. We've talked about the benefits of that. I want to get across one more concept, which again is very poorly understood in the medical profession, because it may very well be that the way or the manner in which this particular subject was taught was presented in a way which sought to classify viruses and bacteria as enemies of us. Recent information is coming through, and again, it all depends on your interpretation. It also it's also dependent on your belief system, that a lot of these viruses and bacteria are actually supposed to be beneficial for us. Now, what do I mean by that? If you study the human body, you will find that there are very, very, very similar things in our bodies. Because remember, our body's been around for quite a few years. And our relationship with the world around us is very, very intimate. And intimate in the sense that we rely on a lot of microorganisms. We allow our bodies to rely on a lot of foreign organisms, which we depend on to serve us and which we serve them in order to survive in this earth. And one of those things, I'll give you a very, very brief example. All of you are all familiar with the cell. I talked about the cell. I talked about the nucleus, the membrane, and one of the other things I mentioned was this thing called the mitochondrion. Now, all cells contain mitochondrion. Now, mitochondrion actually, in point of fact, used to be a bacteria. And that bacteria, that has some very, very important properties. That particular bacteria called the mitochondrion actually is able to convert glucose, sugar, into adenosine triphosphate, which is the energy currency of the body. And when that bacteria met the human cell, they signed a contract many, many years ago. The bacteria said to the cell, I'll tell you what, we can actually convert all this stuff into energy, which will be beneficial for you. And the cell goes, well, what are you getting out of this deal? He says, all we want from you is protection. So the cell has a membrane. All the mitochondria, they get all their brothers together and they all move into the cell, and the cell protects the mitochondrion. But what they do is they have a symbiotic relationship. The cell membrane protects the mitochondrion because the mitochondrion is a cellular, unicellular organism. And by having another barrier, it protects them. In return for that, these mitochondria produce ATP. By allowing glucose to get into the cell, the glucose gets to the mitochondria produces ATP, and the ATP is then used and distributed from cell to cell, which allows us to do all the wonderful things like think and run and exercise and have our muscles pumping and our heart pumping and everything that we do on a day-to-day basis. That is the basic concept of the relationship between a bacteria and a cell. Now, it's not hard now to assume then that a lot of these bacteria somehow manage to sign other deals in other ways. For example, we produce very, very similar things to bacteria called mononuclear lymphocyte, or the white cells, for instance. You've got monocytes, you've got macrophages, you've got phagocytes. All of these cells have very bacteria-like structures. But what do? What they do is they basically break down the cells of our own body which have been used. So when our cells get old, right, our cells have a lifespan. Some of them longer than others. For example, if you take the red blood cell, the red blood cell has a life of 120 days. After 120 days, it goes through the spleen. It goes through a sequestration process where it gets broken down, all the nutrients gets absorbed, and then it gets put through to the bile, and the bile passes out, or the bile is used. So the body is continually metabolizing, catabolizing, and breaking things down, but they do rely on these things like bacteria. Now, the concept I quickly want to get across to you is that if you consider we have 37 to 72 trillion cells in our body, a lot of these cells are going to die. A lot of these cells need to be somehow, they're going to produce some sort of waste product. Consider where we live. Our house produces a lot of waste product, and it all goes out in the bin. And then we rely on our dustman or whatever to come and pick the rubbish up and take it to, well, they're supposed to decompose it or try and find some way to get rid of it. Unfortunately, they end up in landfill sites. But the point I'm trying to make is that every thing that goes through life has to produce waste product. Now, bacteria have a very unique ability, which is that these bacteria can actually chomp away at things which are 25 times larger than its own self. So a unicellular organism can chomp 25 times its size and produce a very small byproduct. And that is a very important information to deal with, because that means then that our bodies, when it breaks things down, these bacteria can actually break those things down very, very quickly. Now, herein lies the problem. A lot of us, through our lives, can get exposed to a lot of chemicals. Like, for example, we might be working with solvents, or we might be picking up, wearing certain things that have chemicals inside them which leach into our bodies and can actually kill some of these bacteria. Now, if they do, what then happens to those things that detoxify our bodies? What happens is that our body then has to switch to another form of detoxification. And that's where your viruses come in. So our body, believe it or not, produces a lot of viruses. And these viruses are actually supposed to be pertinent or profoundly related to certain organs. So for example, your liver. Your liver is actually the only organ that regenerates. But it also happens to be the organ that picks up a lot of toxins, because everything has got to be detoxified by the liver. So by being a toxic liver, if you were to take the most toxic liver on the planet and you didn't have the bacteria because all the chemicals melted those away, how would your body deal with the detoxification of that liver? The way it would do it, it would produce a virus. Now that virus, if you look at the structure of a virus is composed of a cell membrane with another cell membrane within it, or maybe just a cell membrane with RNA and DNA inside. That is what a virus looks like. Yeah? There is no alimentary canal, there's no gut, because it's not a multicellular organism. It's a single cellular organism which just has RNA and DNA inside it, usually RNA, right? So it's like an instruction. That's all that's inside it. Now let me ask you this question. For you to take that virus, how would you introduce it into the body? Can you do it by eating? If you eat something which has a virus in it, does that virus get into your body? No. I'll tell you why. It goes into the stomach. When it gets to the stomach, it's in a hugely acidic environment. That virus will die. So this concept of acquiring viruses through eating is a misnomer. The point I'm trying to get across to you guys is that the virology and understanding all of these things is very, very poorly understood. And people out there are going to push their concepts about how virology works and scaremonger people into believing that some of these things is what's causing or explaining what's going on. And they're very, very good at it. They're very, very good at it. It's very similar to the Kangen machine. People will tell you that the Kangen machine has this mechanism where it overheats, or they'll try and push their product. It's exactly the same thing with science. They're doing the same thing with virology. So just to go back to this concept, our body produces viruses which is pertinent to different organs, but at only any one time, only 4 viruses can be active at any one time. So you can have a virus active in the liver, a virus active in the stomach, or 2 viruses active in the liver, 1 in the gut, and they do their job. But that is only in the cases of patients whose bacterial colonies have somehow been killed off. And now the body has to resort to this other form of detoxification. Now the virus, as I said before, is a cell membrane coat with an RNA inside. What it actually is a solvent. And I use the word solvent just like I explained, for example, if you go into the shops and you go and pick out Daz, or you go and pick out Ariel, or one of these products that produces these solvents that help you to clean or to do your washing, for instance, that's what the virus is equivalent to. And how the virus works is it breaks down the tissue. So in the case of the liver, which we talked about, which is one of the most, which is the organ which can be the most toxic, what the body does, it produces the virus, which breaks those cell membranes down in the virus. Sorry, the virus breaks down those layers in the liver and allows the body to detoxify in that way, because the bacteria which was originally there, which would normally just chomp the thing up, engulf it, and eat 25 times its weight, is not available. So this is where the virus comes in. So that's how viruses work. Now, every organism on the planet does this. Humans do it, zebras do it, elephants do it, pigs do it. Pigs are one of the most toxic creatures on the planet. You go and study the pig and go inside its body, you will actually be able to pick out its own viruses pertinent to the pig. Now, what's actually happened is, when you hear about these viruses which are infecting people, there are different types. There's the ones which are respiratory, airborne, which you can inhale, but normally those are human viruses. So for example, if somebody has a disease of their lung, the lung becomes toxic. So they will produce a virus which is airborne, which will actually clean up their liver, sorry, their lung, and break down the lung in layers. And there's this reason why that happens, is because your lung is trying to detoxify. When that person then presents with the symptoms, they'll cough and sneeze and all of those, and they'll pass that virus on to other people. They will then get that virus go inside their bodies, and if they have toxic respiratory systems, they will go through the same process. So all this concept of viruses and bacteria are actually supposed to be beneficial things that we don't associate any positivity with, because nobody likes to be ill. But that is our way of detoxifying ourselves. That is a concept which is very poorly understood. It hasn't really been accepted mainstream, but it's a concept to understand, because when we have our colds, remember there's a difference between a cold and a flu. When you have a cold, it's cough, 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 sneeze, 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 go away. Flu usually has fever. And it's the reason why is because the two methodologies of detoxifying are different. One relies on a bacteria which eats 25 times its weight. The virus is a solvent that breaks membranes down to help to detoxify. Now, when it comes to how we transmit viruses onto other people, there are different ways. So the one which is pertinent to COVID-19 is the airborne virus. Now, as I said before, the airborne viruses, they do not work insidiously and cause the organ to be eaten apart. That can only happen with things which have an alimentary canal. And the ones that have an alimentary canal will be a multicellular organism. Hence the reason why I said to you all before that my take on this, having used the technologies that I have and managed to eliminate a lot of the viruses and killed some of the viruses in human beings, thereby bringing their symptoms down, like the fever, and then coming into into capacity, those people then they didn't have to get admitted into A&E. But one particular person who did was somebody who had symptoms going on for 12 days. Now, when we tested him using quantum biofeedback technology, we discovered he had a parasite. And I suspect now, putting all of this together, that what we're actually dealing with is what I said in the last lecture on this, which is that my belief system is this. And again, You don't have to believe this. You can regard it as a hoax. But all you're going to do by not listening to me, or what you might do if you do listen to me, is the worst that you're going to get from this is just detoxifying your body. The worm, most people have parasites in their body. They pick it up through eating food. They can pick it up if they have animals. They can get into the body. They come in the form of an egg. They lay inside. They hide in the liver, and they stay there dormant. And when you go and catch a flu, which then affects your immune system, and your immune system drops, this worm then goes on the rampage, and it can start to eat away at things like your lungs. And if you end up having a lung which is damaged, you'll end up in ITU, you'll end up on a ventilator, and they will then tell you that it's the COVID-19 that's done it, as opposed to looking at the elephant in the room, which is the worm which has done the most damage. Yes, the COVID-19 does do a little bit of damage, because the way the virus works is it works as a solvent. It breaks the tissues down, but not to the level where it causes the lung to be completely incapacitated. That does happen with people who are immunocompromised or who are very old. But why you're seeing many people die, now we're up to 28,000 people in England, or UK, sorry, dying. And the majority of those cases are probably, can't say with any degree of assertion because I haven't done the autopsies, and nor will they, because autopsies will not be done on these patients because they're worried about catching the COVID-19. They have to be left for 72 hours. But I have a very, very strong belief based on what I've found that it's the parasite which is going on to do further damage. And that is why these people are ending up in ITU. So what I would encourage you to do is to get rid of the parasites. And the way to do that is to get down to Boots, pick up Ovex, O-V-E-X, which contains 4 tablets. Take 1 tablet and you can kill the worms in your body, or just do a worm detox. Or the other alternative is to go and do things like enema. You get the enema cleanse. You can use the enemas using alkaline water, mixing with the coffee, and then cleaning yourself that way. I think we're going to end there because I think I've gone a little bit over, but I'm happy to take questions. But I hope that helps you a little bit more. I just wanted to kind of pass that message on, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them. Over to you, Anthony. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Imran. Guys, maybe just comment below if you guys are getting value from this so far. Comment below if this is all making sense to you so far, or what have you received from Dr. Imran sharing so far. We're going to go to some questions now. I'm going to hand over to John. He's one of our trainer, one of our leaders here in the UK, and he just compiled some of the questions that you guys have posted in this group to Imran. So over to you, John.
Hi, good morning. Yeah, thanks again, Dr. Imran, for your talk this morning. And yeah, it's always good to hear you speak and share your your knowledge and your the things that you've picked up over your years of training and what you're doing now as well. So thanks for sharing that. Just a couple of questions here. The first one we have from Esther. It's a bit more about eczema and how to treat for children with the Kangen Water. How best to treat the skin, I would think. Is it just applying externally, or is it by drinking and applying? So if you can just give Esther some maybe pointers on that.
Okay, so the question is about eczema in children. Eczema, as you know, is a skin problem. In mainstream medicine, the normal way to treat eczemas would be to apply a steroid cream. Unfortunately, what that does is that it drives the disease into the body. And the only reason why I know that is because as a naturopath, we look at things differently. I remember I said to you about trying to understand medical concepts. So the question you have to ask yourself is, why has that eruption occurred? What is the cause for that eczema to now manifest? And the way to answer that question is to go back to what I said to you about the organisms or the organs in the body. The liver is the organ which detoxifies. Now, if you overwhelm the liver, then what happens is that some other part of the body then gets affected. And what's the biggest organ in the body? Skin. And what happens is it will express that problem. So when you see an eczema appear in a child, it's usually because the body, if you think about it and break it down into some concept, is that your body is trying to get rid of something. It's trying to express a problem onto the skin for the purpose of spreading that out. That's one. And also to alert you to the fact that there's a problem. Now, normally eczemas are usually due to some sort of toxin. It's basically what it is. It's basically a toxin which is overwhelming the liver to the point where you go outside the capacity. Your body can't deal with it. So what it does the next best thing, and it expresses it on the skin. So how do you do that? Well, Kangen water is going to be beneficial because, as we said, Kangen water is basically very beneficial in it is the most efficient transportation mechanism known to man. It can cleanse the body, because if you drink enough of it, don't go overboard, but just drink enough, which you can. You can feed the child pH 8.5 or 9. You can go up to 9.5 depending on what they eat. If they're eating a lot of sugary foods and things like that, then you should go for the higher 9.5, because what that will do after, for example, I said to you, a 70 kilogram male has 45 liters of water. A 10-year-old or a 7-year-old will probably have maybe half of that, maybe 15 liters, 25 liters. So if they're drinking a liter a day, then within 3 weeks, they should be able to have replaced all the fluid in their body. So by drinking Kangen 8.5 or 9.5 over a period of weeks, they're going to be detoxifying anyway. And what you'll find is your child will be going to the toilet to pee a lot. And if they're peeing a lot, then it means they're getting rid of the toxins. So that's the first way to look at doing it. The second way to start thinking about doing it is to address the elephant in the room. Try and find out what it is that's causing this eczema. Because what you'll find is, again, it may very well be to do with parasites. I had a child who came into the clinic about a year ago, and they presented with exactly this. And they usually present as a child. Child had eczema. They went to the doctors. They gave them creams. They drove the disease inside their body. So every time they put rubbing the cream, the skin looks really good. But then the disease is being driven into their body. And what then happened was their lung got affected, and then they developed asthma. And then they put them on an inhaler. But if they'd have got rid of the disease, if they'd have got rid of what it was that was causing the eczema and trying to address that by getting and drawing the toxins out of the body, then they wouldn't have driven the disease in and caused the respiratory problems in the first place. So the things you've got to look at when it comes to children is look at their diet. That's usually the main thing. It's things that they've put in their body that's affecting that. So it's things like milk. Usually cow milk is not the same as what it was because of the pasteurization process and everything that goes with that. So you may want to change your milk. The other thing is gluten. Those are usually the main things that are related to eczema. If you go and look at a program called Doctor in the House, they may be on YouTube. It's by a friend of mine, Dr. Chatterjee. He actually addressed the case where a child had eczema. First thing he did, he went straight into the pantry and raided it. What was the child eating? It was drinking milk, it was having bread, gluten. All of these kind of foods nowadays can cause eczema. So if you get rid of all of those foods, drink the water, eat the natural things like fruit and vegetables, provided you wash them 11.5, I guarantee you will see results within a few weeks. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Dr. Imran. Esther did have another question about why Kangen machines were the best, but I think what we can do is we can obviously send a message to Esther and just let her know where we can find Anthony's training on, the comparison why Enagic is the best machine compared to other ionizers on the market. So if that's okay, Esther, with you, we'll send you a link where you can find that. Yeah. Just going on to next question here from Audrey. Audrey was asking about the zapping machine. Okay, the plasma light energy, and she's asking about that and also about forced vaccinations. So the plasma light energy machine, I mean, is that something that you've acquired and you've used on people? How do you choose? Is it close friends that you're using it with, or how does it work?
So the plasma light machine is a machine which is used out of the clinic that I worked at, and essentially it uses what's known as Rife technology. Now, Rife technology, believe it or not, is going to be 100 years this year. So it's a 100-year-old technology which is not accepted by the medical mainstream medics. And the simple reason for that is because if anybody found out about this machine, all the pharmaceutical companies would drop on day one. Because this machine can actually be used for multiple things. You can use it to treat eczema, funny enough. You can use it to treat bacterial infections, viral infections. You can treat it to use parasites. You can use it to treat hydrocephalus. You've got fluid in the brain, which I'm actually using on my mum right now. You can use it to grow hair. Yeah, you can actually use it to grow hair. All these different frequencies you can use to stimulate cells to work in a certain way. This is a type of technology that was actually very, very controversial when Rife was around. As a matter of fact, Rife went through a lot of crap. I think they locked him up at one point or something because they thought all of his medical claims were all bogus and it was all fake news. And unfortunately, this technology got lost in mainstream medicine because they didn't want to use it. They wanted to stick to the system that they have in place. Remember, the only cure for a disease is a drug. If I start using this, I'm using an unlicensed drug. I can get locked up. So like I said, when I got into naturopathy, my journey was, I tell you, it was exponential because it was like walking onto the Starship Enterprise. Because the things that we use in this thing, and this is what I want to try and get out there. I'm trying to open up a clinic, put it together, and start treating. But I think we can only do it underground. We cannot do this out there because the problem is that those out there are very powerful, and they will shut you down. If you then again we start getting into conspiracy theories. I want to try and avoid that, but things that happen to Tesla, things that happen to certain doctors like Dr. Bradstreet, some of these doctors who got knocked off. There are reasons why these things happen. But again, I don't want to get into conspiracy theories. But in answer to your question about the plasma light, it's a very effective use of treatment. I've used it on at least about 90 or 100 patients in the last year. That's in the clinic. I've used it personally on about 15, 20 people because I only just got the machine up and running last month in March, just on the day after our birthday, John. So yeah, so I got that machine up and running, and then everyone who I've actually used to treat, I've actually kept them out of hospital. 12 people actually I managed to keep out of hospital. The only one who actually ended up in hospital was somebody who had the illness for 12 days. And basically the concept, how it works, as I said before, it uses what's known as a frequency generator. I plug in frequencies into the frequency generator. That's plugged into an amplifier. That amplifier then produces a megahertz frequency. The one it uses is 3.1 megahertz. And that we use as a carrier frequency to carry the frequencies which I put into the machine through the amplifier. And the amplifier is connected to a light source. And this light lights up, and it has plasma inside this vacuum container. And this plasma sends out pulsations of light emanating the frequencies which I've actually plugged into the machine. And what that frequency is frequencies which are compatible with whatever bug it is that I'm after. So for example, with COVID-19, somebody sent me all the frequencies to kill it. I plug it into the machine. I then use some very sophisticated, well, it's not really sophisticated mathematics, but if any of you are familiar with music, you're familiar with the concept of the octave. If you use 8 bars next, you can actually find a sister frequency to that frequency, and you plug that into the machine, and it does it in pairs. And what it actually does, it actually is very effective at killing bugs. How do we know it actually works? Well, we had a case where we had a person who was sitting in front of the machine like this. Behind him was a concrete wall, like this wall here. On the other side of the wall, was a microscope. And on the microscope was a slide, and on the slide was the bacteria, which was collected from that patient's sputum sample. And when we looked at the actual slide, when we turned the plasma light on, it went through his body, through the concrete thick wall, and on the slide you will see that the actual bacteria just kind of like went like that, burst. So we know this technology works. But if you use a different frequency, it doesn't select that. It has to be at the frequency of that particular bacteria. So that's how it is. Where do we buy this machine? You can buy them in the US, you can buy them in Canada. It is very expensive. It's probably it's going to cost you at least $5,000 because it also includes the import fees as well. So I've been using it quite effectively around. As I said before, it's not technology. I had a physiotherapist walk in the other day, and people are very, very skeptical about it. They do not like anything. They go online and they read about Rife and they say, no, it's all bogus, without even trying and testing it. The difference is I've tried it, I've tested it. I cured the common cold in myself. I couldn't believe it. First time in 43 years of my life, I was able to do something like that. And I'm using it, and I can only offer it to the people who are through this platform or through close family friends. The people who I did use it for was mostly family friends, because obviously I've got to consider all the people who come through. But anybody who comes in the house, they usually get zapped with this. And then you can do like 3 or 4 of these treatments over a week, every other day, and they're fine. I hope that answers the question.
Awesome, thank you. I'm just conscious on time as well, Dr. Imran. We've got a few more questions to go through. So I think Ahmed's one about why hospitals don't use plasma light. I think you've covered that. You know, I think we know why they're not using it at the moment. Then just Audrey asked about lemon and water. If she's drinking lemon and water, having tomato sauce, sliced tomatoes in a salad, should she be avoiding 9.5? Should she be on 8.5 or 9? Or is
9.5 is fine. I mean, with lemon and water, remember, lemon is acidic. This is a key thing, right? If you measure the pH of the water with a lemon inside, it's about 2.5. Yeah, but it's not the acidity of the lemon that, because most people think, well, hang on a second, but it's the alkalinity that's the main thing. What the lemon does, it tricks the body into becoming alkaline. Because remember, the lemon's been around longer than you have. Yeah, so your body intimately knows. As a matter of fact, even if you guys imagine a lemon, I can guarantee the majority of you are salivating right now without realizing it. And the reason why is because your body is preparing mentally for that lemon to be induced or to actually accept. So what happens is your body produces enzymes, and it produces the environment or bicarbonate environment to prepare the body for the acidity, and then it alkalizes that way. So no, you don't have to use 8.5 if you're using lemons. You can use 9.5, but if you're on an alkaline, strictly alkaline diet, where everything you put in your body is all fruits and veg and no things like flour and bread and man-made stuff, well, then you should be taking 8.5, because you're going to disrupt the electrolyte imbalance. But again, most people that I know, unless they're vegan or really, really strict about their alkaline diet, most people do drink 9.5 or should be drinking that. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Cool. Just a quick question from Reem. Is detoxifying your body, is fasting good for detoxifying?
Yeah, now fasting is very, very good for chronic illness. So for example, if you have picked up any viral illnesses, you've got to realize that the body, when that shield goes down, you don't just get viruses coming in. The virus will hit the shield, but then you've got the Trojan horse, which is your worm. You've also got bacteria, which are going to jump in it. In fact, anything that you go near is going to jump in, because now it knows, your shields are down. So they're all going to jump in. Your body's intrinsic self-regulating mechanism, provided it's within capacity, may actually get rid of those without you even being symptomatic. I had a patient who came in with Ebola a few years ago, right? In 2019. Yeah. He had Ebola, but he didn't have any symptoms. I had another patient who had TB, no symptoms. Why? Because the body's intrinsic self-regulating mechanism will get rid of it without you knowing. So does fasting help? Yes, because what we found was I had a liver fluke in my body. I fasted for a month, went back on the machine afterwards. I was completely clear of all organisms. I was clear of viruses, I was clear of bacteria, the lot. But like I said to you before, when it comes to bacteria and viruses in our bodies, we have to start to understand that these things are actually beneficial. It's part of our normal detoxification process for us to go through these things. But in answer to your question about fasting, yes, fasting does help. It's good to do, but also it depends on what you do to break the fast. The best thing to do to eat to break the fast is something like kefir or something that has probiotics in, so you can address the guys in the gut, because those guys are the ones that are going to help you and you're going to support them. So it's always a good idea to break your fast with kefir, not as commonly done by some of our Asian and Muslim brothers, which is the date, which is very, very high in sugar, especially the dry date, because dry fruits are very high in sugar. That's the worst thing you can do. The best thing to do is to take kefir, line the stomach as well with that, and then start drinking alkaline water, and then start eating your fruits and vegetables and breaking your fast that way. And don't overeat. You should always try and keep at least 1/2 the capacity of your body or your stomach in order to propagate that. So there's a certain way that you can fast. If you do that daily, then yes, that is very beneficial. Hope that answers the question.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. I'm just conscious of time because we're just going to have a couple of shares as well afterwards. So Quite a few questions here. Just looking at the next one in the list is from Davia. How do we use Kangen for gallstones? Is there a special way to use it for gallstones?
So if you want to do a gallstones cleanse, go and look up gallstones cleanse, because there are gallstones which, so those people who don't know what gallstones are, in your liver, you have the gallbladder. The gallbladder sometimes can become, the gallbladder is supposed to be a receptacle for bile to go in. Sometimes that bile then crystallizes and forms stones. When those stones then get pushed out of the, when the gallbladder contracts, some of those stones can actually push out into the bile duct, go down into the stomach, into the first part of the duodenum, which is the first part of the gut, and they can actually block the pancreatic output as well. So it's a very dangerous situation. So how do we do gallstone cleanse? Go and look up gallstone cleanses. It's a very elaborate sort of cleanse that you can do, which involves apple juice, and it helps to break that down. That would be the thing that I would use in conjunction with using alkaline water to try and help break down the gallstones, if that's something that you wish to do. I would rather do that than go and have an operation and take your gallbladder out, because obviously your gallstone, the gallbladder is a very important organ. You can live without it, but rather than go through the complication of surgery, it's always a good idea to try these naturopathic principles first before you go down that route. I hope that answers the question. But go and look up gallstone cleanse and read about it.
Amazing, thanks for that. I mean, we have run out of time. There are loads of questions still coming through, and I mean, there was one about kidney. What about the kidney virus? Is kidney a detox organ? You know, how's this affecting your kidneys? But you know, is there another way that, I'm not sure if we can get all these questions answered, because we've still got shares as well. Is there any quick way you can give like a 1 minute on that?
On kidneys?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the kidney is a detoxification organ. Obviously, what it does, it cleanses the blood primarily. Again, by drinking water and stuff, it's going to help to hydrate that. I mean, the things you've got to be concerned about with kidney are, for example, things like stones again, calcium. A lot of Kangen water, for instance, if you use hard water, there's a lot of hard water in there. It can actually lead to a lot of buildup of calcific stones. So you've got to be very careful. This is why some people, in addition to having the Kangen machine, they might have a salt water softener, so it can reduce the mineral content so it doesn't build up in the body. Again, if you're drinking things like Coke and all of these things, or things with oxalate in them, that can also contribute to stones. So you can go and have a look at some of the lectures I've given on that. But no, kidney is definitely, it is a detoxification organ, and it is definitely something which can be supported by drinking Kangen water and flushing the system. Because you find, as I said before, when you drink Kangen water, you will be spending a lot of time in the toilet, and you will be, you know, passing a lot of urine, in which case your kidney will be working like the clappers, which is not such a bad thing.
All right, brilliant, thanks. So yeah, I mean, we'll have to just stop it there. Unfortunately, we don't have time on the Zoom call today, so I'm just going to hand it back to Anthony, but thanks for answering those for the guys on today, and Anthony will take over with the people just going to share some stories now.
Okay, all right, brilliant. Thank you very much, John. Thank you, Imran, again. Thank you, everybody, for posting your questions. Apologies, we're not able to get through all of them. You know, if you do wish to have another session with Imran again, maybe just pop in the message box. We'll see how much interest we get from this. So, like, first of all, maybe I just want to see from a show of hands, those of you who are currently experiencing benefits, or just type in the message box, experiencing benefits with Kangen so far. Maybe just raise your hand, or just type yes in the message box. So if you've received, you know, a higher energy level, you can sleep better, just raise your hands, or just type yes in the message box below. And yeah, okay, Barbara says yes, Amy, yes, Kadra, yes, awesome, Diva, yes, awesome, yes, Kangen water, Lena. And what we're going to do now is maybe just share and just hear from some of you guys who have experienced benefits with Kangen. It's just a very brief, you know, a couple of minutes share. And by the way, just before we share, just a brief disclaimer over here that, again, you know, I know a lot of you guys are very sensible. You're listening to this, that Kangen water is not meant to cure, it's not meant to treat or diagnose any illnesses. Where you know, you guys are just here to share for the community what the water has done for you. You know, what was your condition before? You know, and how did Kangen water help? All right, so first of all, I'll bring on my good sister, Sandhya. Off you go there, Sandhya. You're good?
Hi, Anthony. Hi, everyone. Namaste. Thank you, Dr. Imran, for the valuable information of giving to everyone what are the benefits of using this Kangen water during this time as well. And my name is Sandhya, as Anthony mentioned, and I'm drinking this amazing water since 2 years, 8 months now. Before getting into water, I mean, like, I just would like to share my story. 12 years ago, my health was not the same. I was suffering from hypertension, breathing problem, and I'm on a medication for lifelong. So my husband, he introduced me this water and I'm a background health professional. I'm a very scientific and very skeptical person to trust this water technology. Then I was started researching a lot, and I've been to seminars where Dr. Imran explain about the process, how does it works in our cells, like intracellular, extracellular. So I was just looking into that, and I researched Dr. Peggy Parker, who researched a lot and so many protocols. Then after listening all these things, then we invested this one. At that time, we can't afford the money as well, but we thought after researching all these things, we invested in it and we started drinking this water. And I can see the change. I mean, you can't expect that after taking this water, you would expect the results for your health, but it will slowly, you can see the change. After 2 to 3 months, I can see the change. I can sleep well, and there is no breathing problem for me. I can see so much energy in me as well. And then I said, it's very good, actually. I'm benefiting from this water. Why can't I invite everyone to get this device in their home kitchen, where it has hydrogen rich, which will increase the immunity during this COVID situation as well. So there am I now. I'm happy. My family is happy. We are very happy of using this amazing water, miracle water. And I hope everyone will get benefit from this water. I'm so happy to share this with you all today. Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you very much, Sandhya. Awesome. So now we'll just head over to my good friend Robert from Ireland. I'm just going to unmute you there, Robert.
Hello, Andy. How are things?
Yeah, very good. Thank you.
I'm clear I am, yeah. No, my story is very simple, and I started drinking water a few years back, the Kangen water, and I suffered with type 2 diabetes. I had high blood pressure, high cholesterol, but lo and behold, after a few weeks of drinking, sugar levels had come back to normal, and blood pressure had regulated. My cholesterol was back down again. I'm not saying I'm in top form still, but that's what happened to me anyway. Sleep patterns improved, and just the overall health, the general health got better, and I was more alert, you know. So I do find that drinking the water is helping not only me, but helping all my family, you know. So I just find it, I couldn't be without the Kangen water at this present moment. And just on one note there, my daughter, she's on the Kangen water there too, but she's suffering very badly with hay fever and different things. So it's not something that, as doctor said, different things affect different people, but it's a big help to both me and all my family. So that's it for me, Emily. Thank you. And sorry I was late today, by the way. Apologies there to everybody.
No problem. All right. Thank you very much for sharing, Robert. And I'm going to head over to my good friend Reem from Qatar. I'm not sure if you can hear us, Reem.
Hi. Hi, Anthony. Thank you, Dr. Imran, for that great talk. It was like really packed with science. So I'm going to have to rewatch it and really study everything you said. Thank you so much. I just want to actually share this story. And like Anthony said, I'm not making any claims that the water did this, but I'm just sharing with you guys what happened. I bought a K8 several years ago, and it's just done amazing things for me. I mean, even if the machine cost $30,000, I would probably take out a loan and pay it monthly till the day I die. Like every time I use it, feel like I'm using it for the first time. I'm just so blessed to have this device. But the thing that I really want to share with you is that my father, who's 83 years old, he was diagnosed with prostate cancer several years ago when he was about 79, 80. He had a tumor that was the size of a golf ball, and it was affecting his urine ability to urinate. So he was on a bag. He had a urine bag for a couple of years. I actually took him a K8. I'm living in Qatar right now, but I flew over to Canada. I took him a K8. He started drinking the 11.5. Before that, the doctor said, we need to shrink that tumor. We need to give you radiation and chemotherapy. But he's so stubborn, and he said, no, you're not going to do experiments on me. I'm not going to have any radiation or chemotherapy. And he went home. He started to drink only the 11.5. And about 8 months ago, he's 83 years old now, the tumor shrunk and they removed the urine bag, and he's doing great. And this is a man who also has diabetes. He's had 2 heart attacks. And thanks to God, he's doing well. So, that's our experience. It's amazing.
Wow. Thank you very much for sharing, Marie.
Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. Hey, listen, guys. So we are unfortunately out of time for now, and there's still a lot of questions, I'm sure. So what we'll do is we'll try and get back to everybody, either on private message or arrange another call if you guys are up for it. Maybe just type in the message box if you still like to hear from Imran. He's got a wealth of knowledge. I'm sure he's still so much to share. And a few things to also mention, that the recording of this webinar will be posted up on the usual place under our Kangen Superhumans community, along with all the other previous webinars. And on Monday, tomorrow, there is an interview with Simon at 1 p.m. UK time. It's an interview from Simon on me, on how I started with Enagic, how do I kind of leave my full-time job in the corporate industry with Burberry and come to join Enagic, and how we've been able to help impact people's lives around the world, just like you guys are doing now on the call. And then on Wednesday, there will be a special training on Kangen Ukon. Yes, I don't know if you guys are currently taking Kangen Ukon at the moment, or are aware of Kangen Ukon is, but it's basically one of the turmeric capsules that Enagic produces in Japan. And there's a lot of questions about it, asking for some presentation. So this will be on the product aspects of Enagic on the Kangen Ukon. So that will be on Wednesday. So if any of you guys would like to jump on either of those webinars, get back to the person who invited you to this call. If you have any questions about Imran or the webinar, you want to watch replay, because this replay will only be available to our community, get back to the person who invited you. We'll be showing the registration links after this. But otherwise, I want to thank every one of you for spending your beautiful Sunday afternoon with us. And thank you for all the people who shared. Robert, Sandia, Reem, and John, and more importantly, our good friend Dr. Imran. So I just want to unmute all of you. If you just help me to give a big round of applause to Imran. Thank you for his time.
Thank you very much.
Imran.
Wish you all an amazing day. Right.
Thank you.
Imran, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye now, everyone.
Goodbye. Stay safe.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you.